Well, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. My name is Mark Pastor. I'm on Quantum's product management team, and welcome to day 2 of our VirtualQ Protect and Archive event. In this particular session, we'll focus on the role of object storage in enterprise IT. As we will discuss, object storage is a highly durable, highly scalable, low-cost repository for content, and so it is very good at addressing the needs of retaining large quantities of unstructured data in your environment. And for that reason, it can apply very nicely to all of the industries that you see here that are responsible for generating huge amounts of unstructured data on an ongoing basis. So it fits well within these industries, and also because of its breadth of capabilities, object storage, also typically has many use cases within an enterprise itself, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. One of the things that we have found, and one of the reasons that object storage is becoming more and more popular every year, is because there's richer data cases that are being generated all the time. There's more technologies being developed. There's lower cost technologies available that generate large amounts of data, anywhere from AI and machine learning, like autonomous car development or microscopy. Video surveillance and security is a huge generator of video content. Smart cities, there's a tremendous amount between smart cities and manufacturing, tremendous amount of IoT data being generated. And of course, the ongoing research and high-performance computing use cases as well. Not only is the pace of data explosion happening by industry, but the tools themselves are also escalating in their ability to generate more data as that's happening. And of course, because of the way this unstructured data is getting generated, it's becoming very unique. So if I went and were to create a simulation, for autonomous driving as an example, that may take a lot of setup to do. I don't want to have to run that multiple times, and so I might save the outputs of that as a way to efficiently get back to exactly the same data set that I needed to test my algorithms on this time, and then 2 years from now, when things have changed and I needed to retest. It's very important to store these unique cases of data for all kinds of reasons. In many cases, it's to repurpose video content, it's to reanalyze existing analysis and simulations. It's to broaden the number of use cases that you can test intelligence against, et cetera. A lot of interesting use cases are now creating more demand for data storage. So if the challenge is how to store a lot of large data over a long period of time, what are the key attributes that I might look for in a solution? First of all, it's got to be scalable. Certainly as you are involved in these use cases that we talked about, your data set might be relatively small to start with, and you may just be starting up a new application, and so you might be starting with 0 data. And so within the next 12 months, you might say, well, I'll have a petabyte, in 6 months, and I'll have 10 petabytes in 12 months, and I'll have 20 petabytes in 24 months, and in 3 years, I might have 100 petabytes, depending on how you scale and add to your infrastructure. And so what you would really like to look for is an infrastructure and a solution where you can continue to grow modularly so that you can build it out today and in a very non-disruptive way, continue to scale it up as your needs grow. So that's an important attribute. The other thing that is really needed, and people have solved it different ways, but never to great satisfaction until we've had things like object storage around, is I have a lot of data. I want to use it fairly actively. I've got a lot of use cases for it. And I need to store it somewhere, but I can't keep storing it on my primary storage because that's way too expensive. And I can't back it up because the scale of these data cases gets so large that traditional backup use cases don't work so well. And so what I need is I need a place where I can store a golden copy of my data that's extremely durable. So it's well protected against all sorts of things, whether it be, bit drop or site disaster. People are looking for ways to do that. It's one of the reasons public cloud services have become popular as well. And I'll talk a little bit about how this would compare to that. And of course, as I just mentioned, it's got to be affordable. So how can I do these things that I just described in as cost-effective a way as possible? And as always, I need it to integrate well. What we also have found is a lot of these industries and use cases that I described in the opening slides, they're in many cases more about data scientists and and researchers, and they're not necessarily IT people who need the resources of the infrastructure that we're talking about. And so how can we make it easy to integrate these solutions into their environment, particularly when there's not a strong IT infrastructure, or staff. Sometimes it's just a specialized person that's tapped to manage the IT infrastructure of whatever their workflows are. And of course, for that same reason, you want it to be easy to manage. So that's what the solution should look like, and I think we've got a pretty good answer for that. When you're looking for those things, all the attributes I described on the previous page, people who are looking for such a solution, they tend to think about, typically 3 different technology choices. Tape has been known for many years as the lowest cost storage technology, and it continues to be the lowest cost storage technology out there. And so it can serve a very good purpose. And we had a section focused on scaling tape, to large scale archives yesterday. And so tape's one option. Cloud is another option. Public cloud is what I'm referring to here. And we'll talk about the attributes of that as well. And then, of course, there's on-premise object storage, which is kind of the focus of this discussion. And so let's tell you why we think object storage is a great fit. If I'm to look at these 3 technologies, tape, object storage, and public cloud, what are some of the key attributes about each of those? From a public cloud perspective, one of the reasons it's been very popular is because it has an OpEx model, which means I don't have to lay out a large amount of capital spending to get my solution in place. I can basically pay a small monthly charge and start to use it right away. So that does make it very attractive from that perspective. However, as I continue to use it, I continue to pay that monthly charge, and the monthly charge, continues on and on and on in a forever basis. So you never really own your equipment. Typically, you're basically funding somebody else's investment in technology. And there's also a lot of other charges that tend to crop up, such as egress charges. If my data is a little bit more active, where my users need to retrieve it, a lot of times it costs money to do that. Sometimes I need to set up high bandwidth pipes between public cloud and my own infrastructure, which also has costs associated with it. Various levels of activity because of put and get requests, they can cost money. So there's a lot of hidden charges that people encounter on a fairly typical basis. And so that can ultimately make it less cost effective. And we'll talk about that in another couple slides. What public cloud is also really good at, number one, it has the OpEx model that we talked about, but it also can offer really good disaster recovery protection. And it's also really good at durability, at least many of the ones that are out there, because they implement some of the same types of technologies and approaches that we'll talk about with object storage technology. But particularly if you're retaining lots of data over long periods of time, I think if you do the math, do some total cost of ownership analysis, you'll find out that it's pretty expensive at scale. So it ends up not being the low-cost type of solution that you might be looking for. So then moving down to object storage, it is low cost at scale, and I'll show you some TCO analysis in just an example and give you a sense of that. If you have the on-premise object storage deployed in your own infrastructure, of course, you don't have to experience egress charges and a lot of the other bandwidth charges and things like that you might need for attachment to the public cloud. And just a lot of the other hidden charges. So you do have low cost ultimately without a lot of hidden costs buried into that. and you have full access to your data. So it's effectively online access to your data. Object storage does have the kind of durability, at least many of them, and I'll talk about Quantum's ActiveScale object storage, where we do have built-in technologies like erasure code and geospread, where you can actually get good, strong DR protection and very high data durability and system availability as well. And as I mentioned, the data is very much online access, so it really would compare to the highest levels of cloud storage if you're comparing it to cloud, as opposed to strictly just archive storage. And then finally, there's tape, which, as I mentioned, is the lowest cost technology at scale. Again, because it's on premise, you don't have the hidden charges, and so it truly is the lowest from a total cost of ownership perspective. You can also configure tape systems, and that we discussed that in the session on tape yesterday, where you can actually get very strong DR and data durability protection. And it has online access. So the difference between object storage and tape is tape continues to be a lower cost technology, but with some trade-off in terms of latency and time to data, and predominantly those sorts of things. And so you have to look at the level of service and performance that you're looking for, and make a decision about which of those two technologies can work for you, and they can both be really viable depending on what your needs are. So let's take a look at Quantum's ActiveScale object storage platform. Really, we've got many deployments out there, and from feedback from our customers, we're able to kind of boil it down to what is it that customers have commonly looked at, and why do they really love this particular technology. So as I mentioned, one, it's very durable. ActiveScale is based on erasure code technology as opposed to RAID, which has inherent much higher durability capabilities. The other thing about Quantum's, the ActiveScale implementation of erasure code is the way we've implemented what we call our bit spread technology. When you have a component failure, like a disk drive failure, we don't have to wait for any disruptive rebuilding, rebalancing sorts of activities to go on behind the scenes. We can just basically rebuild the objects that were on that disk because we've got all the data in parity in the rest of the system, and all that happens in a very seamless way. You don't have to rebuild an entire stack or an entire ring, of data because you had a failure like that. So it's very efficient and very non-disruptive to ongoing operations, and it's effectively self-healing from that perspective. We talked about the need for scalability, and ActiveScale indeed has that capability. So you can enter in with ActiveScale on something slightly less than a petabyte worth of storage, and you can scale a system all the way up to 74 petabytes in a single system with today's capabilities. And all of that can be done in a very modular way and a very non-disruptive way. So it meets that requirement. One of the things that we found too in terms of object storage is just the nature of object storage as opposed to file storage is object orientation is a flat namespace, and each object basically has user data, user content, as well as an extensive capability for metadata. And when your content is organized that way, you can have this huge repository of all of your content from all sorts of use cases and users and applications. And because you've got this very rich metadata capability, and because over the past several years, more and more software has designed itself with cloud in mind or object in mind, the searchability and accessibility of your data, discoverability, I should say, has really been enhanced over the past many years. And so it now actually makes sense to have a very large repository of all of your content, whereas that used to be a more difficult proposition because the searchability wasn't developed quite as well as it is with today's applications in many use cases. And then finally, the other thing about ActiveScale, I mentioned how it's pretty much self-healing. You don't have to respond urgently when you have component failures like disk drive failures, things like that. And so one of the things that we've heard common feedback from our customers, by the way, the ActiveScale software started its development in 2009, and so it's gone through several generations of product. And so that's made it very proven, and very maintainable and stable, I guess is the word that we use quite often. And so the point I was going to make about customer feedback is that typically they'll get involved in the initial deployment by configuring the product, getting it set up, and from that point forward, they actually never have to think about it. They've established this incredible infrastructure of object storage within their own environment. Their user community finds it easy to connect to it with their applications that are S3 compliant, or sometimes if they had put a file front end in front of it, it just becomes a repository to that. And they really never think about the object storage layer at all. It's very transparent. You effectively have your own private cloud that takes very, very little maintenance and attention, for the many years as you have it in your infrastructure. So a lot of good feedback, and that's really the strength of the ActiveScale object storage platform and why people like it and continue to buy it. Talk a little bit about deployment options. So this is our larger product example. We call it the X100. The top half of this slide, you can see in a single geography or a single location, we can build up to 9 racks of system. And when you tie all those together, you have a raw capacity of about 74 petabytes. As I mentioned, we are erasure code based as opposed to RAID based. When all of the systems reside in the same geography, the overhead for that erasure code can be pretty low, on the order of 25%. And so with that, you can effectively have 59 or almost 60 petabytes of usable capacity in a single geography in a single system. If you want to take further advantage of our capability to span across multiple geographies, which is a real strength of this product as well, we have several customers implementing it this way. You can split the system up into 3 geographies, and so you can have up to 3 different racks in each geography. Again, you still have 74 petabytes of raw capacity, but the overhead's a little higher. Instead of 25%, 63%, but it's still better than the 200% overhead you would have if you were just to make 2 extra copies so that you had a copy of your data at each location. So it's very, very efficient at sharing and spreading the data. So when you have a 3 geography deployment like this, all of the data in the system is accessible to all of the locations. And the other thing that's really good is that you can also withstand a site disaster. So if a site goes down, you have an outage, all of the data in the system is still fully available at the other 2 remaining sites. So that gives you the business continuity and the disaster recovery type of capabilities that you're looking for. So, very flexible in terms of how you can deploy it, again, to maintain this golden copy of your data, which is truly valuable. So elaborating a little bit on some of the total cost of ownership comments that I made earlier. So here's just an example. This is actually at the low end. This is a 20 petabyte deployment. The higher capacity of the system, the more pronounced the differences get between these bars here. Object storage, the ActiveScale product is on the right, and so you can see, it's the lowest total cost over 5 years. And really, what I mentioned earlier is that you would compare an on-premise object storage really to the most performant cloud storage you can get, for accessing your data online. And so that would be compared to, as an example, of AWS here, S3 storage. And so, the object storage really is somewhere, almost an order of magnitude difference between, what I might pay for cloud storage versus what I could pay for on-premise storage. And I have, much more, there's security, there's on-premise performance, a lot of other benefits that you get by having your own infrastructure doing this, particularly if it's as easy to maintain as it has proven itself to be. If you wanted to compare to the lower cost offerings, I have Glacier here, which is an archive offering, and you can see that ActiveScale is even lower cost than Glacier, but Glacier has a lot of trade-offs if you have a user community that wants to access their data more actively, Glacier really isn't a great solution for that. And again, as the time goes on, this is a 5-year analysis. If I did a 10-year analysis, the bars would get much more pronounced, the difference between the bars. So raising the capacity, raising the time scale, both have tremendous impacts in terms of how these bars continue to separate. So object storage online really has some strong cost benefits as well as performance benefits for the user community to access all of their content. In the enterprise, what have we seen so far? For most common use cases, I'll talk about that there's the tremendous breadth of use cases that we are seeing with ActiveScale, and I'll make a comment about that later. But what are the most common that our users or customers typically think about for their initial deployment of ActiveScale? And so there's certainly a lot of HPC, high performance compute sorts of use cases, whether it be analysis or artificial intelligence, machine learning use cases, life sciences, financial services, or financial analytics, I should say, fintech sort of stuff. We actually did a session with Weka.io earlier today, who's a great partner of ours that's got a very, we've spent a lot of time engineering to engineering with them, tuning our systems to really meet the needs of these very, very high IOPS demanding environments in HPC, specifically machine learning, life sciences, and financial services. But there's also a breadth of other primary storage examples that we've connected to out there with our customer base, in a wide variety of other research types of applications in HPC. Media archive is another strong and common use case that we've seen. Quantum, of course, has a very strong presence in the media and entertainment industry with our StoreNext file system that's really designed, and optimized very well for those types of streaming applications and content production. And so we've got a very strong footprint there. We've built a lot of relationships with asset management companies as a result of that as well. And many of the asset managers, the MAMs and the DAMs, have, almost all of them today now have S3 connectivity, which wasn't the case, I'd say, 5 years ago. And so whether or not they're managing the content for users within a StoreNext environment or separately, because they've got S3 connectivity, they can now attach directly to the ActiveScale object storage and manage, get content in and out directly, both in and external to the StoreNext environment. So, media archive retention is another great way, great utilization of object storage. And then finally, data protection and archive. There's a lot of traditional players out there and some newer ones as well. And a lot of our customers have actually have actually adopted object storage. A lot of times, to address the long-term retention or archive aspect of these applications. But also what happens is some companies might implement either for media archive or for some research project in the other two examples and say, hey, now that I've got this, S3 storage in my environment, I might want to use it just to, be the repository for my backup data. So sometimes it's long-term retention archive, but also it can serve a purpose, as a target for backup software as well. And so, that's also a very common use that we're seeing just because it's so convenient to set it up that way. But if it's for archive, typically there's a lot more capacity required, and so that would really demand object storage as opposed to some of the other examples. And I'll walk through a little bit more about that in the next couple slides. So here's HPC. This is kind of a schematic of normal setup. You see the various types of, data acquisition on the left side of the slide. I kind of spoke to this quite a bit already, but you see ActiveScale storage system on the lower right of the diagram. And typically, HPC use cases do, obviously have petabytes, 10 petabytes, or hundreds of petabytes of content that they need to store. The data cases are very large, and it's very valuable content. And so, what's the best way to store this over time? And object storage is becoming really the prominent way of doing that in the most cost-effective way. the most cost-effective and the most durable and the most scalable way. So those are all really why object storage is winning these battles more often than not. So that's HPC example. Excuse me. As I talked about in the data protection side, there are various technologies that can play, and quantum, actually participates in all of these. We've got tape storage, we have purpose-built backup appliances, and we also have our object storage. And so, we are very familiar and have practiced, for many years being part of these workflows. And so object storage can play, if nothing else, an excellent repository for the long-term archive storage. That's the offshoot of data protection scheme within our organization. And as I mentioned, for people that might want, they can just put object storage out there and maybe have it be the ultimate target for all parts of the application. It serves the 3-2-1. Of course, one of the key strengths of tape, as well as protect against ransomware. I think you heard about that in some of our other sessions. And so complementing object storage with tape can be a really good solution as well, where you can have the offline copy of data just in case. Anyway, so a lot of variations here in how you configure object storage to work with your data protection. And then some of the newer offerings like Rubrik or Cohesity, we see a lot of attachment to these applications. And that's because these are designed very much with S3 in mind, or with the cloud connectivity, I should say. They're designed to be able to have an object storage backend as part of the infrastructure that this solution has been designed for. And so we actually see a lot of deployments where our ActiveScale product is put behind these. So that's the data protection piece. And of course, I talked about online media archive. When we talk about archive, I don't want that to, sometimes that implies, like the content is dead. Sometimes, particularly in media and entertainment environments, or, in a lot of different environments as well, the data is never dead. It just may not be active for 6 months, for a year, for 2 years, but there will be a point in time, either companies have updated their algorithms and they need to retest old data cases, or there's something that happened in the news and they need to repurpose some video content. Having an online repository of your data so that the user community can find it, access it, move it to a high-performant part of the workflow, and do their work is extremely valuable. And so object storage fits that role super well. So of course we've got a lot of experience with object storage in the online media archive part of the workflow. And as I said, those were really kind of the most common use cases that we've seen. But as ActiveScale has been evolving over time, we've had many customers doing many more things with it. I think we'll see a lot more IoT sort of workflows, and we're just the list never stops growing. And so we've got a lot of applications that we have qualified with based on customer usage and requests. And so we've actually built a pretty good foundation of interaction with different applications and use cases that are out there. And our experience is that once a customer will implement for one of the most common use cases that we just described, then they'll start to use it in more and more different ways, which is demonstrated here. And that's why we have so much connectivity with these use cases. So this is really the key message, when we talk about object storage fit within an enterprise environment. You will start out with something in mind, whether it be a media archive, whether it be just ongoing, HPC archive, or, just normal business operations archive, enterprise archive. But what you'll find is that having that private cloud available to your user community it becomes an incredible asset. And because it's so scalable, because it's so easy to maintain, the use for the ActiveScale object storage will just continue to grow over time. So object storage has really proven itself to be a tremendous asset and resource for IT, because it fills that huge center of low-cost storage that's both highly durable and performant, and it gives users really the best balance of things that they're looking for to store data for long periods of time. So that's really the key message for that, and I do appreciate your time today. If you have questions, certainly we encourage you to reach out to your local quantum representative. My name is Mark Pastor. Feel free to find me, and I appreciate your time, and hopefully there were some takeaways there for you. Thank you very much.